You are standing in the middle of a spacious, once cozy living room in a private condominium in the Van Nuys neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. A suffocating, oppressive atmosphere of a sudden catastrophe reigns around you. Everywhere there are traces of a fierce, desperate struggle. An overturned coffee table, a shattered glass vase whose fragments scattered across the floor like tiny diamonds, and torn household items. Deep, dark pools of blood stand out clearly on the light carpet, leading to the body of a young woman. This is 29-year-old Sherri Rasmussen. Her life was cut short a few hours ago with unspeakable, brutal cruelty. The police, who will arrive at the scene in a matter of minutes, will quickly inspect the rooms, document the mess, and put forward a convenient, simple theory: a botched robbery by two unknown men who happened to enter the house. Investigators will file the first reports, turn a blind eye to obvious contradictions, and leave the case to gather dust. They will persistently convince the press and the family that it was an ordinary, transient attack. However, the most terrifying, deepest paradox of this bloody drama is that the real killer at this very moment is not hiding in cellars or dirty quarters of the city. This person is sitting in a cool office of the Los Angeles Police Department, wearing an official blue uniform with a shiny metal badge on their chest, calmly filling out paperwork. The killer is an active detective, Stephanie Lazarus, who is called upon to protect the law and seek out criminals. The justice system, which should protect the innocent, turned into a strong, impenetrable shield for a monster in its own ranks. Then, everything fell apart. The first years of the investigation became a prime example of institutional blindness and collusion, with the LAPD deliberately ignoring any indications of their colleagues' guilt, protecting the blue wall of silence from the outside world. Have you ever wondered what happens when the law begins to cover up crimes within its own system? We are used to trusting people in uniform, seeing them as a salvation in the most difficult moments of life. But what to do when this very official status becomes the perfect license to kill? I want to address this sharp, painful question to each of you listening to these words right now. How do you evaluate the actions of the police leadership, which for 23 years refused to even listen to a grief-stricken father begging to check a female detective? Is this ordinary official negligence, or is it a conscious, cynical protection of their own that destroys the very essence of justice? Leave your candid comment at the very beginning. Share your thoughts on how to break this cycle of collusion. While you are writing down your thoughts, we will go through this long path of investigation, step by step, to see how pride and confidence in one's own impunity led to an epic finale. Sherri Rasmussen was an amazing, bright, and incredibly goal-oriented woman. She dedicated her entire life to the noblest cause, medicine and saving human lives. Despite her young age, she had already achieved colossal career success, working as the director of the nursing department at a large Los Angeles medical center. She was respected by colleagues and adored by patients for her boundless patience, responsiveness, and professionalism. Sherri dreamed of a big, happy family, a cozy house full of children's laughter, and a peaceful future alongside her beloved husband, John Rutan. They had only recently celebrated their beautiful wedding, made plans together, and were just starting to furnish their new condominium in Van Nuys. Sherri was the embodiment of vitality. Her blue eyes always shone with optimism, and her soft smile could comfort anyone in their darkest hour. However, from the very first days, a thick, dark, ominous shadow from the past of John Rutan hung over this young marital bliss. This shadow belonged to Stephanie Lazarus, a young, ambitious female LAPD officer who previously had a long, passionate, and painful relationship with John during their university years. Stephanie was maniacally obsessed with John. She considered him her personal property and had no intention of letting him go even after he clearly stated they were broken up and that he chose Sherri. Lazarus repeatedly came to their house uninvited. set up covert surveillance, wrote strange letters, and even once directly stated to Sherri's face that if John wasn't with her, he wouldn't belong to anyone in this world. Sherri was seriously terrified by this uncontrolled aggression from a woman with a gun and a badge. She begged her husband to talk to his ex-girlfriend and resolve this issue once and for all. During a detailed examination of the crime scene in 1986, forensic experts, who did not yet know about this hidden love triangle, recorded one unique microscopic detail on the body of the deceased. On the inner side of Sherri Rasmussen's forearm, a deep, crimson, distinct human bite mark was clearly visible. During a fierce hand-to-hand struggle, the attacker bit into the girl's skin with all their might, leaving behind their biological signature. One of the attentive experts carefully swabbed this area using a special cotton swab, placed it into a thin glass tube, sealed it in a paper envelope, and sent it to a deep repository of medical evidence. Remember this detail now. We will return to it decades later, when the technologies of the future can extract the absolute truth from this silent trace, a truth that no lawyer or corrupt official will be able to deny. On February 24, 1986, John Rutan returned home after a hard day's work and found that the apartment door was ajar and his bloodied wife was lying on the living room floor. Sherri had been wounded by 3 point-blank shots from a .38 caliber pistol, with one of the shots fired through a soft sofa cushion to muffle the sound. The lead detective on the case, Lyle Mayer, showed a strange, almost suspicious stubbornness from the very first hours of the investigation. He categorically refused to consider a theory of intentional murder or a contract attack. Instead, he persistently pushed the theory that 2 burglars of Latino descent broke into the house, panicked when the homeowner unexpectedly resisted, killed her, and fled, taking only a few small items and the car keys. It was a classic institutional trap, a false lead created to close the high-profile case as quickly as possible and avoid digging too deep. Sherri's father, Nels Rasmussen, tried to break through this deaf wall of police indifference from day one. He repeatedly came to the Los Angeles station, brought detailed records of threats from Stephanie Lazarus, talked about her visits to the hospital where his daughter worked, and begged detectives to simply check her alibi and test her service weapon. But the department leadership's reaction was cold, cynical, and aggressive. Detective Mayer literally yelled at the unfortunate father, demanding that he stop making up nonsense and interfering with professionals doing their job. Investigators openly declared that an LAPD officer could have nothing to do with this brutal crime, and that all of the father's suspicions were merely the product of his grief-stricken imagination. The file on Sherri Rasmussen's case was finally closed, filed under the category of unsolved robberies, and hidden away on the furthest archive shelf, hoping that time would forever wash away all inconvenient questions. It lived in the body like a splinter that cannot be removed. This unspeakable, terrible pain destroyed Nels Rasmussen and his entire family every day for the next 23 years. They understood that somewhere in this very city, the killer of their beloved daughter was not just walking free, but wearing a police badge, receiving a state salary, enjoying the respect of society, and making a successful career inside the very system that should punish such atrocities. The father wrote dozens of letters to attorneys general, appealed to mayors, confidently declaring that the killer was being covered up by her own colleagues through collusion and the so-called blue wall of silence. But the system remained absolutely blind and deaf to his pleas, reliably protecting its employee from any checks. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging into real archives, forensic analytics, studying thousands of pages of protocols, and searching for hidden connections that others simply overlook. Take 10 seconds right now, like and subscribe. This is what keeps cases like this from staying cold. Your activity Every comment and every like is the only real power that helps us continue our work, open the locked doors of criminal repositories, and make the law work even when the system tries to hide the truth from society. Decades passed before the truth came to the surface, and the situation changed dramatically only in 2004. DNA analysis technologies took a colossal, revolutionary step forward, and the leadership of the Los Angeles Police Department was forced to create a special task force to review old, unsolved cases where biological samples had been preserved. A young female analyst at the forensic laboratory, Jennifer Francis, received permission to open the archive box of the Sherri Rasmussen case. There she discovered that very same paper envelope with the cotton swab, on which microscopic residual traces of saliva from the bite mark on the victim's arm had been preserved for 45 years. But science had its own view on this case. Jennifer performed an extremely complex sequencing of the molecular chain and obtained a shocking result that instantly shattered the official 20-year version of the police. The DNA at the bite mark belonged to a woman. There were no two Latino male robbers at the crime scene. It was an intentional, brutal murder committed by a woman acting alone in a fit of wild rage and jealousy. Despite this momentous scientific breakthrough, Jennifer Francis faced powerful internal resistance within her department. When she tried to enter this DNA profile into the system to compare it against police employees, the laboratory management and lead detectives literally ordered her to stop the investigation and hide the test results back in the folder. She was directly hinted that if she continued to insist on checking the version involving a police officer, her career would be permanently destroyed, and she would find herself on the street without severance pay. Collusion once again tried to shut the mouth of truth, protecting Stephanie Lazarus from accountability. Knowing and proving are two completely different things. The analyst understood who was behind this crime, but was forced to remain silent for several more years, waiting until the department's leadership completely changed and new, honest officers came to power who were not tied to the old corrupt schemes of the past. The turning point came only in 2009, when the case was handed over to two young homicide detectives, Robert Bubb and Jim Nuttall. They had no obligations to the old leadership and decided to conduct a full, independent investigation from scratch. Secretly, without publicity within the department, they pulled Stephanie Lazarus's personnel file and discovered that over the past 20 years, she had made a brilliant career. She had become a respected top-tier detective, heading the prestigious art theft detail, married a respected fellow police officer, adopted a beautiful girl, and was considered a true icon for young LAPD officers. In parallel, the detectives pulled old records regarding the theft of Stephanie's personal weapon. It turned out that 2 weeks after the murder of Sherri Rasmussen, Lazarus officially reported that her private .38 caliber pistol had been mysteriously stolen from her own car in a shopping mall parking lot. This was an obvious, cynical disposal of the primary piece of physical evidence. In order to arrest such an influential figure within the Los Angeles police, the detectives needed an ironclad, direct biological piece of evidence that no lawyer could challenge in court. A highly complex, delicate undercover surveillance operation was developed. Undercover detectives followed Stephanie Lazarus's every step for several consecutive days as she visited stores, gyms, and cafes. The narrative micro-thriller reached its climax on one of the sunny May days of 2009, when Stephanie, along with her daughter, went into a local fast food restaurant. She ordered a cold drink, drank it through a plastic straw, and with a familiar motion, threw the empty plastic cup into a trash can near the exit, after which she calmly got into her car and drove home. The operatives, following closely on her heels, instantly retrieved the cup from the trash, packed it in a sterile bag, and immediately sent it to an independent laboratory for urgent analysis. The result of the study shocked everyone. The DNA from the saliva on the plastic cup of the respected detective Stephanie Lazarus matched the DNA from the bite mark on the arm of Sherri Rasmussen, who had been murdered 23 years ago, with 100% accuracy and without a single microscopic error. In June of 2009, the leadership of the Los Angeles Police Department decided to carry out the arrest as quietly and safely as possible, so that Stephanie Lazarus, who always carried her service weapon, would not start a shootout right inside the building. She was invited to the basement of the main station under a completely fabricated, false pretext, alleging that young detectives from another department needed her professional consultation regarding an expensive painting theft case. Stephanie calmly and confidently walked into the interrogation room, smiling warmly at her colleagues, and relaxed into a chair while holding a cup of coffee. For the first hour, the conversation covered abstract topics. But gradually, the detectives began asking more specific questions, shifting the subject to her past student life, university years, and, finally, to the name of John Rutan. The video of this interrogation remains a unique training material for forensic scientists worldwide. The viewer can visually see how, in an instant, the expression on Stephanie Lazarus's face completely changes. Her confident, respected mask of a successful detective literally began to crack and crumble before one's eyes. She started to stutter, nervously fidget with her fingers, pretend she absolutely could not remember events from 20 years ago, and try to leave the room as quickly as possible. But the door was already locked, and officers with handcuffs were waiting for her in the hallway. The moment of complete, ruthless unmasking took place in 2012 during a high-profile trial broadcast across the nation. Stephanie Lazarus's lawyers attempted to build a defense based on her unblemished 20-year service, her numerous awards for solving high-profile art thefts, and her charitable activities. They tried to present her as a victim of internal department intrigue and the imperfection of old DNA tests. However, step by step, the prosecutors completely deconstructed her public profile as a respected female detective. They demonstrated irrefutable scientific evidence of a genetic code match from the bite mark to the jury, brought up her old diaries where she described in detail her painful, frantic jealousy toward Sherri Rasmussen, and proved the fact that she concealed the weapon after the crime. The jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Stephanie Lazarus to life imprisonment with the right to seek parole only after serving 27 years in a strict solitary cell in a California women's prison. The question mark never completely disappeared. It was simply declared closed. However, this case left a deep, heavy mark on the public consciousness and the history of law enforcement in the United States. It clearly demonstrated how dangerous and destructive collusion can be in power structures when protecting the honor of the uniform becomes more important than human life and the law. Leaving the courtroom after the verdict was announced, Sherri's father, Nels Rasmussen, told reporters that his 23-year personal war was finally over, and his daughter could now sleep peacefully, as her name was completely cleared and the killer received her well-deserved punishment. But this triumph of justice had a very bitter aftertaste, as the family was deprived of the opportunity to see how their talented daughter's life would unfold due to the institutional selfishness of the justice system. Today, Sherri Rasmussen would have turned 69 years old. She should have walked a beautiful, long, fulfilling path of life, raised her own children, seen their weddings, held her little grandchildren in her arms, and met a happy old age surrounded by a large, loving family on the cozy porch of a house under the California sun. She could have saved thousands more human lives, headed a large medical center, written scientific papers, and given her boundless warmth to everyone around her. Instead, her figure forever remained a tiny, frozen point in the cold winter of 1986, a 29-year-old woman on the living room floor whose right to life was cynically and ruthlessly trampled by a person who believed that a blue police uniform and a badge reliably hid them from earthly judgment and human memory. This unique story became a fundamental lesson for the entire world, proving that no amount of time, no high social status, no connections among leadership, and not even collusion within the law enforcement system itself can protect a criminal from the inevitability of full exposure when the past begins to speak in the uncompromising, precise language of modern molecular technologies. Justice may move very slowly. It may wander in the dark for decades due to human incompetence, corruption, and laziness, but it always finds the right path to the culprit's door. Take care of your loved ones. Be attentive to every detail around you. Never trust the deceptive masks of public respectability, and always remember, no case stays cold forever if we continue to fight for the truth and the bright memory of those who can no longer speak for themselves before this vast world. We will see you in the next case.